And it was great, you know, we were kings, and we all, you know, just at the prime, and we all used to just go around London in our cars and meet each other and talk about music with the Animals and Eric and all that. And it was really a good time. That was the best period for fame-wise, you know.
1963 was the year the Beatles rose from the best group in Liverpool to the best group in Britain. The group's rise to stardom this year would begin Britain's dominance over rock and roll, which at the time was ruled by American acts. No one since could quite explain why the Beatles rose to such fame and created such hysteria. Their progression musically this year alone was astounding, with 4 singles being released and every one of them hitting number 1. The group released 2 albums this year which both dominated the charts and changed the way pop music was made. Pop albums before them had been padded out with poorly recorded filler around one hit song. With the Beatles, there was no filler. They would change the public's view of pop music, which at the time was seen as lower class entertainment. Not only did they change musical taste, but fashion and class barriers, all with no intention of doing so. With the Beatles became the album college and university students who saw pop music as beneath them would have to be seen with a copy. It became acceptable to come from any class. Equally, the group changed fashion with their long fringes, which were imitated throughout Britain. Often schoolboys with the Beatle haircut were sent home or expelled for what was seen as outrageously long hair. Equally, their Cuban-heeled, pointy-toed shoes sold by the thousands. These boots, that became known as Beatle boots, had been popular with bands in the 1950s, but by '61 had declined in popularity. Their resurgence began in '63. January begins with the Beatles starting a short tour of Scotland. Due to bad weather conditions, it's called off after 4 shows. 11th of January, the Please Please Me single is released. Lennon later said he wrote it at his aunt's house, attempting the style of Roy Orbison. 5 days later, the Beatles appear on the television show Thank Your Lucky Stars. The show is big promotion for them. They perform their newly released single Please Please Me. The single receives widespread radio airplay. By the end of January, Brian is receiving offers for the Beatles to appear on various popular radio shows around Britain. At this time, Brian Epstein was in high spirits. He thought now he could finally make good on all the promises he'd made. Brian's job would soon go from booking local clubs to organising recording dates, radio appearances, press interviews, contract negotiations and transport. At the same time, Jerry and the Pacemakers released the song the Beatles passed on, How Do You Do It? It goes to number 1. By February, sales of Please Please Me was strong. EMI don't expect this and have to press more records to keep up with demand. Brian at this time sees into every aspect of the group, even down to the fan mail. The responsibility of every decision falls on him. The band begin to blow up. In Liverpool, they're now massive. Fans crowd Brian's record shop Nems to catch a glimpse of them. Nems becomes a popular hangout for Beatles fans, much to the annoyance of Brian's father, who owns the store. 2nd of February, the Beatles begin their first major tour of the UK. During this time, EMI plan to capitalise on the success of Please Please Me and release their first album. George Martin asks the group what material they have to record quickly. They reply, their stage act. 11th of February, the Please Please Me album is recorded in one day at Abbey Road Studios. Afterwards, the Beatles continue their tour of the UK until March. Brian Epstein takes every opportunity to promote them. As they travel around the UK, they moan about whether all this is necessary for record sales. As the tour goes on, Brian contacts the group to tell them Please Please Me has shot to number 1.
I think Please Please Me got to number 1, right while we were on the road.
With this, the group are now known as Parlophone's recording stars. The Beatles continue shows around England in the bitter cold. John constantly carries plastic cups of tea to warm his hands. February 28th, John and Paul write their follow-up to Please Please Me on a tour bus. A week later, From Me to You is recorded. George Martin is amazed by the quality of the song and their musical progression in such short time. March 22nd, the Please Please Me album is released. April 14th, the Beatles meet the Rolling Stones for the first time. They visit the Crawdaddy to first watch them perform. Brian Jones is the first of the Stones to approach them and asks, "Were you playing a harmonica or a harp on Love Me Do?" The two groups talk until dawn. Around this time, Paul begins a relationship with an actress named Jane Asher. April 28th, Paul, George and Ringo holiday in Tenerife while Brian Epstein and John Lennon travel to Spain on vacation. While in Tenerife, the three Beatles get sunburnt, visit an idle volcano, and Paul writes unfinished lyrics on a notepad on the beach. May 1st, fan mail begins to build up at each of the Beatles' parents' home. George's mom personally answers each letter. 4 days later, Decca signs the Rolling Stones. May 18th, the Beatles go on tour with Roy Orbison. At this time, George Martin speaks to EMI about doubling the Beatles' royalties. EMI agree to these terms if they sign a 5-year contract. Martin argues they should do it as a reward for the Beatles' success. They see him as a traitor. June 18th, Paul's 21st birthday. A party is thrown at his aunt's house with all the Beatles in attendance. John gets blind drunk and throughout the night his mood turns sour. DJ Bob Wooler is at the party and makes a joke about John's trip to Spain with Brian being a honeymoon. In response, John beats him mercilessly. An ambulance is called and Wooler receives a broken nose, broken collarbone and broken ribs.
With me beating up Bob Wooler at Paul's 21st, and that was terrible, I was so afraid, what the outcome of nearly killing him, because I nearly killed him, because I think he'd said something about, insinuated that me and Brian had an affair in Spain, so I remember it vaguely. I was out in my mind to drink, or, when you get down to the point where you drink all the empty glasses, that's drunk.
Wooler later said, in compensation, he got £240 and a half-hearted apology from John. The Daily Mirror hear of the scuffle and contact everyone involved for a story. Most decline. June 21st, the scuffle appears in the Mail with the headline, "Beatle in Brawl, sorry I socked you." In the article appears a quote from John stating he was so intoxicated he didn't realise what he was doing. June 26th, Paul and John begin writing their next single on a tour bus. June 1st, the group record their next single, She Loves You. The record pre-sales reach over 230,000. EMI are astounded. With this news, record labels begin signing any half-decent bands in Liverpool. August 8th, Julian Lennon is born. John later states, had it been a girl, they would have named her Julia after John's mother. August 18th, George becomes sick and is bedbound. While in bed, he begins writing his first Beatles song, Don't Bother Me. August 21st, She Loves You is released. 6 days later, the Beatles take part in a documentary titled The Mersey Sound. They give interviews about their success, and clips are taken from them performing Twist and Shout live. They are also recorded performing Love Me Do to no audience. September 10th, John and Paul bump into the Rolling Stones manager Andrew Oldham. Oldham tells them the Stones are looking for a song. To help them out, the Beatles give him I Wanna Be Your Man. 2 days later, the Beatles record George's song Don't Bother Me to feature on their second album. October 13th, the Beatles play Sunday night at the London Palladium. Hundreds of excited fans wait outside the theatre. The next day, it reaches the headlines with the title Beatlemania. Through the month, the press continue to write about hysterical fans. 17th, the Beatles record their next single, I Wanna Hold Your Hand. It will also be released by Capitol Records in the US. October 24th, the Beatles leave England for a tour in Sweden. On their return, thousands of screaming fans await them. A week later, the Beatles announced they'll be making a film. November 1st, the Rolling Stones release I Wanna Be Your Man. It becomes the group's first UK top 20 hit, peaking at number 12 on the British charts. November 4th, the Beatles play at the Royal Variety performance. John makes a joke suggesting the audience in the cheaper seats clap their hands and the rest of the audience rattle their jewellery. It was a joke Brian Epstein had begged him not to say. The press report this throughout the next few days, and EMI receive a pre-order of 700,000 copies for I Wanna Hold Your Hand. At the same time, the cover of their next album is shown to EMI. A photo taken of each member's face in front of a black velvet curtain. EMI hate it. They think it's humourless and depressing. Brian Epstein doesn't like it either, and he's worried it might damage their image. November 22nd, the group's second album, With the Beatles, is released. George Martin claims it's better than the first album as they've had more time to work on it. On its release, Nem's record store is overwhelmed with fans rushing to buy the album. Every worker, including Brian Epstein's assistant Peter Brown, serves customers right until closing time. Over 500,000 copies are sold in Britain just in that day. A week later, I Wanna Hold Your Hand is released in the US. At this time, Melody Maker report girls are fainting in the streets during their tours. December 27th, the Beatles fan mail becomes unmanageable. Thousands of unopened letters begin to pile up. Brian at this time dreads going back to Liverpool. He spends his time in London, only travelling back to Nems occasionally. The locals resent him for taking away the city's best band.
The Beatles, they are the Liverpudlians and they belong to us. They belong to the cabin. And yes, let the rest of the country have them. Let them enjoy them. But please, let them come back to us just at least once. Just to be the same as they used to be.
When he drives down to Nems in his new Jaguar, an angry local throws acid over his car, destroying the paintwork. Brian decides to move the company permanently to London.
It was impossible to go home. And also, it's very true. If you're in our business, you go to London. I mean, that's where it happens. The recordings are where it's happening is it's just a natural move, you know.
The year ends with the Beatles' Christmas show. They detest the event, and besides, John states the audience aren't even listening, they're just going mad. With 1963 ending, the Beatles have now conquered England. Next, America is in their sights. Thank you to everyone who supports the channel. If you wish to donate, it would be greatly appreciated as this is my main source of income. Just click the three symbols next to the video, then the thanks icon, and however much you wish to donate. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for my next video.